Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well today. It is raining outside, so I'm hustling to the shop. It's gonna be a little bit loud in there because I've got a metal roof on. You can kind of hear it. But here we go. We're inside, we're safe. I wanted to walk you through today how I made a project that's a little bit different for me. It is a sheath. I've been doing a lot of wallets and bags recently, but just the other day I decided I wanted a different way to carry my pocket knife around. So I got this knife about 20 years ago. It was on a family trip to Europe, and I thought it would be the coolest thing in the world. I was a kid, thought it'd be the coolest thing in the world to get a Swiss Army knife in Switzerland. So that's what I did. I got this knife here. It's super simple, just a single blade. The long blade though, low profile, nice and slim. The only other tool this knife has is a Phillips head screwdriver. I really like this knife, and I've been carrying it on and off ever since I got it almost 20 years ago. So I decided the time had come for another way to carry it, and that's why I made this sheath. I'll tell you more about it later, but first, let me show you how I did it. I started out by drawing up a plan in a free iPad app called Vectornator. Now, in theory, a Vectornator plan should be printable. You can export it as a PDF or whatever you want to print it as. But I didn't have access to a working printer today, so I just went ahead and lined up the grid lines with my ruler that I use with my rotary cutter, and made it so it was pretty much exactly the right size. And then I just did the manual printing method. I traced out through a piece of just normal notebook paper directly from my iPad screen, and it actually worked really well. I was able to get the stitch lines I wanted, and I was able to trace out the plan that I wanted to make for my sheath without any printer whatsoever. I did double check to make sure that it was going to fit my knife, and then I used an X-Acto knife to cut out my template. Now this template is going to be really handy for giving me a kind of real world stand-in to make sure that it's the right size. And you'll see right here I have to pull off my belt so that I can double check before I go any further, before I really commit to this thing. Is it going to fit my belt? And it does. So I pull out the real leather and start getting to work tracing the template on the leather. I'm just using a scratch awl for this, just kind of scoring the surface of the leather where all of my cuts are going to go, and I make it all the way around and make sure to transfer those scratches to the inside of the belt holes as well. Now, cutting out those belt holes would really be a lot easier if I had a 1/4 inch hole punch, but I don't, so I did end up having to do that manually. So they aren't perfect by any means, but they get the job done. They stick to my belt just fine, and you'll see that in a little bit later on. I was able to cut out the bulk of this material with my rotary cutter. I absolutely love this thing. It's easy to use, it's super sharp, and it is great for almost everything except those kind of inside corner cuts. So you'll see as soon as we get to those inside corners, I grab the X-Acto knife and cut those just tiny little bits out using the knife. After I had two kind of reversed mirrored surfaces, I got ready to glue them up. I lined up the edges pretty well, even though I knew I was going to come back and sand them later. And then as soon as I got the glue out, I immediately made a mistake. I put glue in the one spot I wasn't supposed to put the glue, because this is a sheath and the knife is supposed to go right between those two slots. The glue needs to go around the outside and just barely along the inside of those belt holes. So as soon as I was able to remedy that, it was all good. It was just kind of a demoralizing thing to do, gluing the dead center of the sheath right off the bat. Anyway, I got it glued up, and as soon as I had those securely attached to each other, I used my compass again to trace out my stitch line. I went all the way around the outside edge, except for the opening for the sheath. I learned my lesson there. And then around the belt holes as well, so that those are going to be nice and solid once they're stitched together. As soon as I had my stitch lines in place, a nice guide, I got my pricking irons out and started to pound my stitching holes. I love pricking irons because they make all, or they take all the guesswork out of stitching. You know exactly where every needle is going to go, and so you don't end up with any kind of wiggly lines or long stitches or short stitches or anything like that. They space everything out for you, and I highly recommend, if you're going to ever stitch leather, instead of just using an awl to go hole by hole and maybe coming up with some uneven lines, to just use pricking irons. Now here I'm kind of outlining the direction I'm going to take. In order to do one long stitch line, I need to go around the outside and then down into the sheath. So I bring it over to my vise, which I'm going to use as a stitching pony for today, and go all the way around that route that I just traced out with my finger. Once it was all stitched, I brought it over to my belt sander, where I finished off the edges, just smoothed them out so that any sort of jagged cut marks were gone and everything looked nice and even. Of course, my camera fell over, but this is what the sheath looked like right after being sanded. The edges are much more smooth. They're still a little bit rough, but the curves are much smoother and a lot prettier. In order to finish the edges, I'm going to use Tokonol and burnish the edges. I'm going to rub it in with my finger first in order to kind of make sure that it's in all the cracks and crevices, even getting inside those belt holes. And then I'm going to bring it over to my drill that has a burnisher on it and fire that thing up and then go to town there. Using a drill saves a lot of time on burnishing because it does a lot of work really fast, as opposed to just doing this by holding the burnisher in your hand and going over it. You'll notice that I started on a bigger slot and moved down in order to taper the edges, and then once I got those edges burnished, I was able to finally test the fit of the pocket knife. It really had to jam in there, but it made it, and it looked pretty darn good in there, if I do say so myself. All right, it's been a couple days now, and as you could probably tell from that video, that fit was really tight, and it was a challenge getting the knife into and then back out of the sheath. Well, after wearing it for a little bit, it has started to break in. The sheath has started to stretch out a little bit. It's still really secure. I'm not at all worried about that knife coming out, even if I'm doing front flips and somersaults and back flips and what have you, take it to the trampoline park. But it's also not that hard to pull it back out. So it's broken in really nicely already. I think it'll continue to break in a little bit, but I'm not worried at all that it's going to stretch out too much to where that thing's just going to fall out on its own. I'm really happy with this sheath. It's really narrow, sits really close and tight to my waist, doesn't stick too far up, so my shirt doesn't always get caught on it. So I'm really pleased with this sheath. I love this knife. It's a great combo for me. I hope you were able to learn something from this video, and if not, I hope it was just entertaining. Thanks for watching the video.